Get started then. Well, thank you very much everyone for joining us this afternoon for our chamber update with Andrew Kerr, Chief Executive of City of Edinburgh Council. It's fair to say I think Andrew's been in the thick of it since we started to feel the impact of coronavirus about mid-March. He's been heading up the team dealing with this health crisis. And I think it is right to remind ourselves that this is primarily a health crisis, and rightly so. It's been the main priority of the City Council to protect lives and to take care of the vulnerable in our city, and as well as trying to keep the core services going with impact on the workforce at the City Council. However, alongside the health crisis is a very serious economic crisis. And now that we're into something like, was it week 9 of the lockdown, I think Edinburgh has seen significant hit to our economic performance, with many businesses shut down, and perhaps sadly many of them might be permanently shut down. So I thought, just before Andrew starts, I thought I'd just put a little bit of context without trying to steal your thunder, Andrew. But you know, when you look at how the city is being impacted, I suppose more than many cities, we've benefited from a really vibrant tourism sector. So I guess the converse will be that we're going to be more impacted as this sector is really feeling the impact of shutdown. So it's not just the tourism sector as well. Alongside the hotels and bars and restaurants, our transport businesses are being badly affected. The summer festivals have been cancelled, and as Alan knows, who's on the call, so is the Royal Highland Show. We've got the construction and key developments like St James and the tram extension to Newhaven, that's been delayed. Our universities have been impacted by the loss of the international students, most of them now moving online study for September. But extraordinarily, something like 20% of the population of the city is made up by students. So we're going to have a real impact on consumption, with few of them coming back to university. And as you know, last week, the ONS published the Q1 economic update showing a fall of almost 2% in GDP for Q1 this year. And March falling almost 6%, I think the largest fall since Q4 of 2008. And most economists predicting that Q2 is going to be much worse, possibly up to 35% fall in GDP. And we had the chief economist of RBS speaking last week, and he was reminding us that it's potentially the worst recession in 300 years. So, you know, this is the context in which Andrew is operating. Just a few other kind of key facts and figures before I hand over. Skills Development Scotland suggests 21% of the workforce has been furloughed, and 66% of businesses using the furlough scheme. So I guess the big question is how many of these furlough people will be returning to work. Skills Development Scotland suggests that 920,000 jobs are at risk in Scotland, and in Edinburgh this figure could be as much as 120,000. So as a city we're going from almost full employment, just 2.9% unemployment, to 7.9% unemployment in 3 months. We've seen a 500% rise in universal credit claims, and sadly it's the under 25s and females who are 2.5 times more likely to be unemployed as a result of this crisis. So how we bounce back and how quickly we might recover depends on getting businesses back up and running and minimising the permanent business closures and the job losses. So having painted a bit of a gloomy picture there, we also have to remind ourselves that we are an incredibly resilient and resourceful and innovative city, and the businesses tend to be very resilient and resourceful. So I think now's the time that we all have to come together and work with the City Council on how do we reset and look at new business models and adapt to the new ways of working that the future is likely to bring. I know Andrew's been doing a huge amount of work on recovery. There's a number of work streams have already been established, So I think probably time to hand over to Andrew to tell us really what he's been up to for the last, probably seen the longest 2 months of his life, but also how is the city going to support the economy and the business community really come back and adapt and understand how we can rebuild the economy of the city. Over to you, Andrew. Oh, I better remind everybody, there will be a time for Q&A afterwards. Rebecca's reminded me, but because of the numbers, we're expecting about 80 people to join the call. If you can submit your questions via the chat function, and then Rebecca will read out your question to Andrew on your behalf. I think that's where we'll kind of have an orderly meeting and we'll get through it much faster. Okay, thank you very much. Over to Andrew.
Okay, so you'll all be listening to my plea to be kind to me. Of course, stuck alone in my lonely room trying to manage a city remotely is always an interesting thing to do. I thought I'd start with, you know, what have we been doing in the meantime, and then I'd give a little bit of the economic context, but Liz has done some of it, so I don't need to do that. That's good. But then actually do talk about what we're trying to do in thinking about what happens when we come out of it. If I just give you a few facts of the things that Council have been doing, we've been, of course, providing families for children with food parcels. So the more vulnerable people in you know, so that's 2,000 food parcels every fortnight, 1,600 food parcels to those that are shielding. We've got 170 staff working in 9 school hubs feeding approximately 750 children of Edinburgh's key workers. We've helped about 5,000 local businesses get grant funding, and as of about an hour ago, we've paid out £72.4 million to businesses in Edinburgh alone, so that's quite a considerable sum. And we're now, of course, concentrating on those who are in the self-employed category and trying to make sure that by the end of this week, the vast majority of those people who are eligible are paid. We've moved most of our services online, so we've answered, even in a month, we've answered 12,000 questions on social media, 36,000 inquiries over the phone. Our refuse collectors are picking up our bins still, 300,000 bins a week, every week, and that's still happening. And we're about to open our recycling centres on the 1st of June, just all for your own personal needs. And £80,000 paid out in community care grants and nearly 500,000 out in crisis grants to 3,500 people. We're also trying to keep our council tenants safe, and we're doing about 180 housing repairs every day still, despite our need to be social distancing. And we opened 5 resilience centres so that people at local level can actually access our services a little bit easier. But those have taken 4,200 calls and 2,000 emails just about shielding alone in April. So you'll understand the scale of this. And last, and maybe not so surprisingly, but actually what we've managed to do is we've managed to get most homeless people off the streets. We've got about 250 people in either hotel or flat accommodation. And I've just been having a discussion about whether that is sustainable with the Scottish Government as we go forward. So nearly nobody homeless on the streets right now. Not that you see it because you're all in empty streets, you're all seeing empty streets, but actually we're managing to look after these people equally well. I think the key issue for us is one about trying to make assumptions about what happens after the 3 months we've had of lockdown and whether that's going to continue, how long it's going to continue for, and what form it's going to continue. And we're anticipating the First Minister will make some announcements on Thursday, which should start the process of loosening off the restrictions that we've all been working to and living under. It feels to me like I've spent 8 weeks in this room with this lamp growing out my head. You see it's quite blank behind me. That's because I moved all the library books, all my study books downstairs to a new study. I thought I'd do that during lockdown. It gives me something I've been meant to do for years and actually managed to do it this time. But actually, on the not so funny side of that, we've been having to deal with quite a lot of people who don't exactly like living at home and working from home, and the mental health issues that we've started to deal with in social care sense have been quite serious. And if you look at just my staff, we've got 18,000 staff work for us, something like 8,500 of them actually working from home. We've managed to maintain our whole administration whilst going forward with some adjustment as we go. And other than the things you've heard of frontline services adjustment, like, you know, recycling not running, we're not cutting all the grass, we're not doing that, we're doing bits and pieces that we're not doing. The vast majority of the council operations continue to run. And we've surprised ourselves, even surprised ourselves at how well the technology has worked for us, how well we've managed to work from a place of being separate from your colleagues and not having in meetings every day and sitting down round the tables. But actually what we're trying to plan for now is a number of scenarios, I think, where we're looking at whether we have a quick rebound. In other words, the virus just disappears if we're very, very lucky, or we get a virus or somebody falls upon a virus somewhere. Although Jonathan Seckel, who is one of the senior people in the university who actually chairs the government body that gives out grants, research grants, tells me that it's possible that this is going to last us 3 or 4 years if you want to be really depressed about it. So not a fast recovery. We're looking at the scenario of a slow recovery and maybe a double dip. In other words, we come out of this current peak, but actually go into some smaller peaks as we go nearer to Christmas and beyond. And therefore, we've tried to look at a number of those time scenarios which allow us to think about both the city and the city council in those cases. And we put together 5 programs. And I think it's worthwhile just briefly discussing all 5 programs because they all link to what's going on in the economy. One of which is just a program on public health and public health advice. And we are talking to the NHS just now about that being a regional setup to allow us to advise the city and its surrounding and its people, city region, about how it can start to operate in the new normal, whatever the new normal ends up looking like. And that depends, I guess, on your business or what you do for a living and where you are. And that program, we think, is likely to drive the timescale of almost everything else, because we'll be taking national advice. And so far, what we've been doing is listening to UK government, but obeying Scottish government advice on what we do, and that's causing a little bit of stress, as you probably know. Liz mentioned the construction industry being allowed a bit considerable more freedom in England and not currently in Scotland, and that's something that businesses have not been very quiet about, I think would be fair to say, even with us, and we'll need to take that kind of thing on board. You wouldn't be so surprised that we've got a programme which is all about our own service operations. So the vast majority of services we're running need to think about how they're rebuilding back up to operating fully or not fully, or what the new looks like, and that'll be the same for every business. And I think if it's my advice to anybody, the thing we're finding already, and we're a very big organisation, I get that, is working through a number of scenarios so that you can act swiftly in whatever scenario actually happens, is the way we've thought about doing this, so that we're able to respond hopefully in an agile way to whatever guidance or situation occurs because of the continuation of COVID virus restrictions. We've also got a programme that's looking at our own people, our own working practices and our finances. And you're not alone in terms of it. All businesses potentially suffering because of this. Our best estimate is in the first 3 months we lost £70 million. Because if you can imagine, we're not picking up any car park charges, we're not picking up any bus fares from Lothian buses, we're not picking up any tram fares, and we've shut all our gymnasiums. So like Edinburgh Leisure losing about £440,000 a week as a result of doing that as a business. Then we've got a programme on sustainable economic recovery, which I'm going to talk about considerably more just after this. And then the last thing to say is we've got a programme we're calling Life Chances, but as one of the key issues for everyone here, contained within it, and that is, when are we going to return to schooling, and when are schools going to go back, education going to go back to anything like normal. And in particular in that case, because we believe that the intention nationally will to be come back in some form by August, that we are looking at a number of different scenarios about, depending on social distancing, for instance. If we're still at 2 meters social distancing, it's almost impossible to have a class back in school physically or practically. So we're having to think through different scenarios as we go, and a proper blend of home working and schooling is likely to be the outcome. But also continue to look after our most vulnerable, our homeless, people with mental illnesses, with those that are in our care homes for obvious reasons. And as Liz pointed out, I have the joy of being the National Chief Executive Representative in Health and Social Care for Scotland. That means I spend a good 3/4 of my day discussing that at national level, because as you can imagine, everything from deaths and illnesses in care homes right now are the thing that's occupying most of the nation as a priority. So those are the 5 programmes. We intend to, on the positive side, we intend to, and we're recommending to committee next week, that we're going to use the thing that we were going to launch in March, which was a new city vision for 2050, as a basic set of principles for us going forward. So making this a fairer city, a more connected city, an inspiring city, etc., are still the principles that we think Edinburgh needs to go forward with, notwithstanding the issues we're going to have to deal with over the next 5-10 years as a result of this extraordinary circumstances we find ourselves in. So if we go on to economic development, because it's the thing, I guess, that affects you most, we've set out a number of principles in our own plans. I think that was that we should be ambitious and rebuild the city's economy into what the city wants it to be, rather than what it's trying to return to. Because we genuinely believe that it won't ever return exactly to where it was before the virus, and a number of bits of the economy will certainly change extensively, and that we should be visible in leading the city's response and providing that reassurance and confidence that the council's playing its role in planning for economic recovery. And I'll go on to explain how we're doing that in a minute. But as Scotland's capital and economic centre, we're trying to make sure we drive the national conversation so that it recognises the importance of Edinburgh and its region to the economy. We're going into this, we were a third of the economy anyway, at least, and in some bits of the economy much more than that. I guess in tourism, we were much larger percentage of the economy going forward, and we continue to be so and will continue to be so. But the inclination of government to trying to be fair to the whole of Scotland means that sometimes in the arguments earlier on, we were being not ignored, but we were being set aside because Edinburgh will be okay, won't it? Because it's in a better place. And of course, we are a stronger economy. And of course, we are maybe in a better place than some of the poorer parts of the country. But also, it may be we are the economy that's most affected, as Liz pointed out in the introduction. So we're going to try and make sure we're focused on long-term outcomes rather than short-term fixes, and build some resilience into the economy that continues to focus on a whole bunch of principles about fairness. So inclusion, fair work, net zero carbon, and dealing with poverty. And even our approach to poverty is likely to change enormously, isn't it? Where we had some hope that we would be able to reduce poverty in Edinburgh, because actually we had a specific type of poverty, which was in job poverty in Edinburgh, running into this. As Liz just pointed out, it's likely to be the fact that, like everyone else, we're going to have maybe the worst unemployment that we've had since the war, having going into this virus situation with the least we've had since the war. So it's flipped it on its head. What we've got to do, though, is we've got to think about capitalising opportunities that arise from the crisis. There is opportunities to accelerate major development projects and key strategic sites, and we're already gearing ourselves up to think about that. We're trying to get a number of policy responses to that then. So a number of project areas, I guess I'd like to outline. So one is about capital investment in infrastructure, getting shovel-ready projects ready for progression, progressing the major development projects, Tram, Granton, Bioquarter, West Edinburgh, et al. And we've, in fact, just employed the director for Granton this week during this crisis. So we're not stopping doing business. Looking particularly at employability and skills. And of course, with the Capital Partnership has been doing a great job about maintaining, I guess, what you'd call a version of the Edinburgh Guarantee, but thinking about this being a city guarantee for all ages, but particularly concentrating and rebooting the efforts to get young people into employment, into the right kind of employment and training, and supporting the newly unemployed back into work quickly. Filling those skill gaps in the key sectors, and maybe using our city deal money to do so, because there is some money lying there, and if we can persuade government to let us flex that, then we should be able to get people back into tourism, hospitality, care, construction, those that are going to immediately be a boon to the economy going forward. And responding also to the impact of the thing we've all now forgotten about, which is Brexit. Well, we seem to have forgotten about it, just at least temporarily. And making sure that we're also future-proofing skills for a zero net carbon future, and taking advantage to make this city more sustainable immediately. And some of the temporary measures you've seen us put in place, I think we can confidently expect us to intend at least to keep going as we get more permanently once we get through this crisis. I think we need to make sure we've got a good bit of business resilience and growth going on, and that the business gateway and enhancing what we're doing in business gateway and adapting to new ways of working, and developing new markets in a post-COVID economy being one of the things we're going to concentrate. We, of course, need to make sure that what we do is reboot our tourism, culture and festivals going forward. Paul Lawrence and I spent considerable time with the airport this morning, discussing their plans and how they plan to get back into business. And despite it being a little bit depressing in terms of how long that might take, it's helping us understand what we're going to need to do as a city to help that kind of thing recover. And then maybe the very obvious thing is that looking at the digital path for recovery, we had 600 million in a DDI programme in the city region deal. We need to flex that and make that differently to that which was envisaged when we went into the deal 2 years ago now. And we have to make sure that that reflects the needs of the city and the city region in a much more, I was going to say pointy fashion, but much more direct fashion to make sure we start to recover. And lastly, you would expect me to say this, but making sure that we've got regulation better and we use them as levers for recovery as opposed to be a blockage to recovery. So getting our planning and licensing much slicker and quicker and better than it was, and making sure our procurement and commissioning is a lever for change. So we are commissioning and procuring with local businesses, making sure we're not just going with the biggest and cheapest, but supporting localities and making sure they're effective. And then the last thing to say really is that we envisage some actions we take now, and in fact we're pretty much in listening mode, and this is part of it, where we're speaking to various sectors of the economy in detail in meetings like this, and listening to the situation they're finding themselves in, and some of the ideas about how we get ourselves out there. And some of you will already be in some of these meetings already, I'm nearly sure. And then thinking about what we do between now and September, because at that point we'll need to reset our own plans, our own budgets and our own programs to make sure that we can do what we need to do within the resources we've got. And then the last thing to say is we're also planning for a much longer timescale than the next political cycle. So local government will have elections in 2022, everything tells us that this will take longer than that to recover, and therefore our plans are going to try and cover a much longer period in time. So you can see we've been doing some thinking. I think we're at early doors because we're just listening right now. But we're doing some thinking about how we go about this, and I'm very happy to answer any questions or take any comments or anything else you wish to foist upon me at this point in time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's kind of a bit of a canter through everything that you've been dealing with. Goodness me. I can see through the chat there's quite a number of questions coming through, so I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, and she can read them out, and let's see how we get on.
So the first question I'm going to ask is, even if local authorities in Scotland use up all their reserves, austerity 2.0 seems an inevitable result of the current crisis. What is the council doing to mitigate the impact on Edinburgh?
Can you say who is it from as well, Rebecca? Sorry.
Yep, so it's from Benjamin Carey.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So the first statement's right. Even if we use all the reserves, we haven't got enough money. But what we are doing is we're looking at what the opportunities are to use the assets we have to look at long-term borrowing, look at how we use our funding more effectively, and what we stop doing and what we start doing that actually supports the economy and supports the city. There's no doubt we're going to have to make some hard choices going forward. And at the moment, we've only got enough money in from Scottish Government to cover about 30% of the costs that we've actually incurred, extra costs that have actually incurred from COVID. And so we're missing 70%, and we're trying to talk to government about at least making sure that they cover the extra costs we've incurred, and then allow us to have a chance to both to help the city and to recover effectively as an organisation going forward. But we are looking at what our financial strategy will be, and I've got a paper coming to my corporate leadership team next Wednesday, which is going to set out a number of scenarios about how we do so.
Perfect.
I don't know any more than that right now because I'd be guessing.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is from Judith Mackay, who says, we see news media reporting out low quality UK public procurement of PPE during COVID-19 and understandably stressed supply chain during this challenging time. I'm going to try and paraphrase a little bit because it's quite a long question. Has Edinburgh a city council an ethical trade code of conduct for the supply chain like Manchester City and the Edinburgh University's APUC programme? And how do you see the city council managing checks and balances of the supply chain sustainably in the months after COVID-19?
So we do have an ethical framework. I'm not sure it's the APUC, the same as the university, but we do have an ethical framework. We've been very careful to watch who we've been taking supplies of PPE from. What I would say is we didn't have the crisis that quite a lot of the UK did in getting supplies of PPE, mainly because our procurement service were right on top of it right from the beginning. And we've managed to source it from a large number of spaces. In fact, you'll see this week us thanking some of our international contributors to that supply of PPE as we've gone forward. So we've applied a rigorous quality process to that, and made sure that what we were doing, as far as we can discern anyway, what we're doing is we're taking those supplies from ethical firms and backgrounds and countries, because there has been countries. So, for instance, both China and Taiwan have been supplying PPE to us, different bits of China and Taiwan. We've had to do a sense check to them. The universities have been helping us supply PPE right across the board. So we haven't had, we've always had a reasonable supply and a warehouse, or a couple of warehouses full of PPE waiting, and we still have right now as we go forward. That will become more difficult as we get to more trace, test and isolate, and more of the general public will want to use things like face masks going forward. The only thing we've suffered for in PPE has been the variety of advice we've been getting on what PPE is necessary for different jobs and different professions, but the supply has not been an issue for us. Not really. I mean, of course it was an issue, but we dealt with it.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question is from Alan Laidlaw, who has a question regarding schools. Can event spaces like the Royal Highland Centre at Ingliston help with space for both indoor and outdoor schooling?
Well, I think it can, Alan, if that's where we end up being. We're looking at that scenario. We of course prefer if we're able to use the current school buildings to cope with most of it, and maybe the next door, leisure facilities that we have in the city, because it's less disruption for the young people and their families, etc. But I think in the scenario where we are still in the need for quite restrictive lockdown, there's no doubt that we're going to look right across the city for potential for buildings that we can use for our young people, so that they can continue to be educated for both indoor and outdoor. So yes, the answer is yes. It's just that I don't think we know yet, and we're going to develop a number of scenarios, and we will come and speak to you about, well, if it's this scenario, what basis can we use those things. I can see you sitting at the bottom of the screen, my screen now, nodding. So
yeah, we've got a discussion paper we'll probably ping to you, Andrew. I don't know if who else would include that, and you can have a look at it.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question is a tourism-specific question from Benjamin Carey, who says, Westminster controls UK ports and immigration. How can Edinburgh and Holyrood implement an appropriate test, track, trace regime for international arrivals at Edinburgh Airport in order to protect public health and recover confidence in overseas markets?
Well, what it looks like is that UK government are going to be very restrictive in terms of what happens when you land on a plane. If we're looking at what happens in ports, etc., we've had several ships land already with a request to come into the city for their crew, etc. And it's our environmental health teams that have the powers to either agree to that or not to agree to that. And although it's UK legislation, we've got the powers to implement that legislation going forward. It's going to be, again, a moving feast, I think, as we get further and further out of isolation and into a more new normal. But as I think you can probably see, the Scottish Government are being very careful about what they do before we take any risks with public health. And my team, my environmental health team, are right in the middle of that discussion, as are the Health and Social Care Partnership. So what we will do is be giving priority to people's health and safety. And we, despite all the pressure to just let the economy up and get running, we've got to make sure that what we're not doing is killing people as a result and making people ill as a result. So we're using that as the #1 priority.
Perfect, thank you. So the next question is regarding destination marketing from Julie Trevestine-Hunter. So with the hibernation of marketing in Edinburgh and previous statements such as Edinburgh sells itself, how will Edinburgh promote itself as a destination collectively? Was the push to proceed with the hibernation in April well timed?
Well, nothing's well timed in this crisis, I can absolutely promise you. So if we're with 2020 hindsight, of course, maybe it wasn't well timed. But I mean, we're just in a completely different situation now. That situation was, we have for the last the council for the last maybe 5-10 years has accepted the premise that Edinburgh was doing quite well on its own. Thank you very much. And it particularly in tourism terms, didn't really need very much international promotion to get more tourists in, and therefore you call it the hibernation of market in Edinburgh, but the hibernation of that organisation was at least due to the fact we didn't have very much choice in terms of resource, but we felt it was a reasonably safe thing to do. I think it's completely turned on its head, as I've just pointed out, and I think there is a need to market the city both in UK terms and international terms, and remarket the city and maybe market it better than others. So we're having to, and we are, talking to the tourism industry, and we've got a meeting tomorrow with the tourism industry, and considering what we do with both the currently hibernated marketing Edinburgh and if we just halt Market Edinburgh and start again and create something absolutely brand new, or whether we use that as the basis to create a much bigger effort between the private, public and government sectors to promote this city, because undoubtedly we're now going to have to, whereas April, or maybe March, because maybe April is, because we started the process way back in February, March, we couldn't really have anticipated that this is where we'd be.
Perfect, thank you. So the next one is from Richard Johnston, who says, can you recap / summarise the major infrastructure projects that the city is focused on, and are there others that may be brought forward to boost development and ultimately construction and user benefit?
So yeah, I can. I mean, we've got the tram for obvious reasons. You've got Granton, you've got the city centre plan, you've got West Edinburgh plans. You've just seen the Garden City being given planning permission by the Scottish government, so that will be going ahead. The Bio Quarter is another one that we were just about to again go to MIPIM to promote to the world and try and get financing for. So all of those big projects will be given bespoke teams. They will have a director in each case, and they will have a project team and a finance team and a legal team to help them progress as quickly as possible. And what we're having to think about now is what those, how those contribute to the revitalisation of our economy, because no doubt there'll be pressure to get stuff on the ground. I think the other thing to say is we're wrestling with, and I think there is a danger, of course, that it is affected, but we're wrestling with how do we get house building up and running again as quickly as possible. And that will partly depend on our ability to get people out and building, but actually also the confidence in the market. What actually happens is we all know, I think the development market's quite conservative with a small c in terms of risking its money. So we need to be working equally hard to make sure there's large projects. And of course, trying to get things like St James's finished, and making sure that we are helping St James's get finished in as quick a time as possible, even if it's been delayed. And the other thing for us is the vast majority of our own capital programme is currently in schools. So at Queensferry High School, 3 weeks away from being finished, much to our frustration, because we haven't finished it. But we'll be trying to get that done so that people can be occupied. And we've got another 4 schools waiting in line, both that are in various stages of development that we've committed money to already. So all of those things very important. What we have to think about is that as a council, is how much do we and can we stimulate those parts of the economy by thinking about using our own finances and our own kind of blue chip status in terms of borrowing, etc., to accelerate some of those processes going forward. And that's what we're thinking about doing now.
Thank you. So the next question is regarding public transport from Fiona Doherty. Public transport is critical to getting the economy moving and getting people to work, as well as getting children and students to education. Is the council going to avoid the encouragement of cars as a transport mode, both within and out the city, to ensure that public transport, which has played a critical role in keeping communities connected during the crisis, has the confidence needed to encourage people to travel?
So Fiona, the council's going to try. This is people's behaviour we're talking about here, and actually social engineering is never an easy thing to do, is it? I think it's quite unhelpful if you see Boris saying don't go near public transport and get in your car and travel to work, for being honest. And that's not a political point, it's just I think it was a messaging point, was a bad news. We are going to try and take advantage, if you like, of the current lockdown to try and encourage people onto public transport. But the restrictions around public transport and how many people you can get on a tram or a bus or anything like that, or a train for that matter, are going to be the key factor here. And also, if your employer's saying get back to work and get back to work as quickly as possible, encouragement to just get in your car and go is quite high, isn't it? So we're going to have to think that through. All our messaging will be about public transport being the primary way to work, but in fact, that will depend on a whole series of factors in terms of how this lockdown is lifted.
Thank you. So Richard Knight asks, to what extent in your conversations are you noticing stakeholder expectations of the City Council evolving or changing? Does that have any implications on how you see the purpose of the City Council going forward?
Actually, I've been quite encouraged by our interaction with our stakeholders on what's going forward. I think the conversation we've had a conversation with quite a number of key stakeholders about sticking with some good principles that we started off with this year. And the whole thing about moving to a more sustainable economy and dealing with reducing poverty in the city and it being a fairer city. And it still remained good. And I think that's the feedback we've had from the stakeholders. And, we were having a discussion in the airport today where you wouldn't think it was the most obvious place to have a discussion about sustainability and carbon neutral, but we were having a long discussion about how that's achieved in an airport context and an air travel context going forward, because they understand that's both the wish and the will of the council going forward. So I don't see that changing, and I think any programme we have will build upon those principles. I think there's opportunity in there. There's opportunity in a new sustainable economy. There's an opportunity for us to be a healthier place in terms of active travel and people walking and cycling more into work, and even less cars than we've got now. But of course, the consequences of making all those changes in a short space in time are, of course, enormous. Even for the council. If we're going to stop cars coming into the city centre as a principle, then we have to accept that we can't charge for parking, can we? Or maybe we can charge for parking. We won't get many people in there to charge. So there's a financial consequence. So we have to think those things through as we go. But so far so good. We're early days yet, aren't we? We're going to get. It depends how long, I guess, this crisis really lasts in terms of businesses being back and the city being back working, and how it goes back working. But we are looking at the Sustainability Commission is giving us some advice about what we should do coming out of this crisis. Poverty Commission actually had a look at it yesterday, and it was launched yesterday. You can go on our website and see what the Poverty Commission are recommending, and a lot of that is about just being aware and being aware that what we're likely to have is many more vulnerable people, very more people in poverty in the immediate future, and how swiftly we get those out of that status is going to be one of the keys to us recovering quickly.
Thank you. Joe Goldblatt asks, are there any plans in place or developing regarding Edinburgh Christmas and Hogmanay?
Well, let's say we're in discussion, constant discussion on exactly what we do. I go back, Joe, to the point that I don't think, unless you've got a really big crystal ball, if we know we're going to be fully back operational by Christmas and New Year, or whether we can even plan to be so. My best guess is that the cultural festival Christmas New Year event scenario is at the very least going to be changed as we go. And I'm not quoting you council policy, because council doesn't know. Because we are just trying to, and we're talking to the people involved in organising it right now about what's possible. We're developing a number of scenarios, and what we are of course hoping to do is that we'll have some way of celebrating Christmas and New Year for all our sakes as we go forward, and some way of celebrating our festivals as we go forward, but in an amended way. So they won't look the same, but the principles will be there. And some of the sustainability of these organisations is key to that. The Fringe, the International Festival, Book Festival, etc., are all having some struggle. Yeah, that's right, Highland. The very big events that happen and that couldn't happen this summer and won't be able to happen this summer, have a great effect on the finances of these organisations going forward. And I think we've just got to watch what we do.
Thank you. Mark Douglas asks, what would be your key asks of us as a business community as we move forward?
So I think that there's two things that occur to me, one of which is just some encouragement to do what we're doing, because we're a business just like anybody, although we might be a social business and we're having to scenario plan till we're nearly dead, and saying, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. If this happens, this is what we're going to do. If this happens, this is what we're going to do. And working out what our timelines are for the various points of, I was going to call it crisis, but I don't even think it is crisis, but various points of pressure on the business going forward. So when do we start to run out of government subsidy? When do we start to run, and plan all these very carefully so that you're able to, and we are able to respond quickly. And I'm not trying to teach my granny to suck eggs here, but I think we've found ourselves in a position where we're doing that much, much more, having to scenario plan, and it's the truest sense scenario plan, for almost everything we do, so that we've got maybe 5 plans running that say, depends on the circumstances, is what we're going to do. So that's first thing. And then the second thing is to keep promoting Edinburgh to the government, to your associations, to your connections in the network you have, and use the Chamber of Commerce and people like that to enable you to do so. But I think that promotion of Edinburgh as an economic entity and the need for governments and other financiers to help us, and that's you as businesses, become better quicker, is really important. And we'll be, as far as we can do, we'll be helping you do that as we go forward.
Thank you, Andrew. So Lane Brown asks, the third sector has a huge role to play as shown by SCVO #NeverMoreNeeded campaign. Is the Council planning to work in partnership and collaboration with the third sector? Prosperity will be aided by what our sector can bring to communities in need.
So today at lunchtime, I agreed another £170,000 to go to EVOC as part of their effort to help us with food parcels and volunteering. And Volunteer in Edinburgh are working closely with us, and we've got a £50,000 pot that we're helping smaller voluntary businesses in their efforts to help the most vulnerable in Edinburgh. So the answer very clearly is yes. And in fact, the discussion we had at lunchtime today was about what I do think is our third sector relationships have got much better as a result of crisis. I think sometimes needs must, of course, that's what happens, doesn't it? You sometimes put both politics with a small p and politics with a big P aside, and you have to get on with it, and that's what we've done. And I think we need to build on that. The Edinburgh Partnership that brings together all the public sector bodies and the third sector is never going to be more important than it is now, because that part of our economy is going to have to thrive, particularly to help those that don't just quite get back on the horse and get on with business again. We're going to have to make sure that they're looked after in the same time as we're encouraging businesses to get better and get back on the horse and get operating.
Thank you, Andrew. Shona Casket asks, you've spoken about having a project area surrounding employability and skills. Which industries do you see as requiring the most upskilling and reskilling in Edinburgh as a result of the COVID crisis? And what are your plans to address this? Also, in what way will the Council provide additional mental health support for job seekers and employees?
So on the latter, we already do. We provide mental health services for employees and employers, and if you want to go to the Business Gateway, you should be able to access that quite easily. On the second part, not my guess, but I think the principles that we had running into this was that technology and our digital skills need to keep being enhanced, particularly in our young people, but actually for those returning to work, and encouraging people who are going to be unemployed because their industry is not particularly doing very well to get back into other industries. So swapping over to things like the tourism and hospitality industry, which might be, although it's the biggest threatened, might be the quickest to get back up and running. And also construction skills, and those kind of skills are going to be vital, because if we're going to build our way over the next 10 years into a more successful place again, then we're going to need those construction, engineering, practical skills going forward. We've got £25 million set in the city region deal against skills and employment. My entire wish, given that I was right at the heart of making that happen, that 1.3 billion, is that we will increase that exponentially, so that we're able to work with our colleges and universities, etc., to provide the training quickly, so that those people who need retraining and need new skills can get them as quickly as possible, and we can get back to a successful economy.
Thank you. Julian Slater asks, as a local independent travel agent, it's encouraging to hear that your future procurement decisions may change from large UK companies to include local Scottish companies. We have found public sector organisations often just go with the Scottish procurement framework that tends to exclude companies like ours. It will be interesting to see if this happens. Maybe a strapline, stronger together, not apart, could work. Do you really see that smaller Scottish companies can benefit?
Yes, I think so. And the only thing I would say is I know for a fact that 65% of all procurement from the council goes to small local businesses. So this is it's not something we just talk about. We actually try and do. Now, whether that's enough in the new scenario is something we're going to have to judge, aren't we? But we do tend to use frameworks like Scotland Excel, etc., where there's large bulk buying of things, so that we can of course buy efficiently and effectively like any other business. But actually, for the most part, we try and buy locally, and we try and make sure we do so. So that we'll continue to do that, and we just need to make sure we've got a weather eye on that, and the ethics of it as well, about who we're actually putting, where we're putting our money and where we're putting our procurement effort, so that we've got the right people. And better together seems like a good phrase for me.
Thank you. And the final question is from Kieran Quinn, who says, given the scientific proof that outdoors is a safer environment than indoors, has there been any thought that, given to how the council could support hospitality by loosening restrictions on pavement and outdoor licensing, with appropriate measures similar to some countries on the continent?
Yeah, yes, we are, and we're actively doing that right now. Almost anything goes in terms of our thinking about what we do. So as part of our scenario planning, we are thinking about how do we get an outdoor economy, open economy, restaurant economy outside, not outside, etc., up and running quicker than we're able to do, for obvious reasons, indoors, because of the spacing needs, etc. I don't think anybody should underestimate this. It's going to be very difficult, but we are, as far as we can, making sure that we're going to try and make sure that our regimes, our licensing regimes and our planning regimes, etc., take those things into account in the future, in the immediate future, so that we are able to loosen the reins and let the economy thrive. Because in the end, it's businesses that make the economy, and it's businesses that make money in a city. And we've got to try and just be the facilitator to help you do that, and maybe coordinate some of the work around it.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. I'll hand back to you now, Liz.
Actually, Andrew, I think I've probably got one final question before I bring it to a close. You mentioned earlier on you thought it would be 2022 before we really started to see full recovery. I mean, that's a long time for businesses who are hibernating or looking at redundancies and what the new normal for their businesses might be. Do you have some kind of timeline of how we will progress to the new normal and what recovery could look like, so that we can all start contributing to that?
Yeah, so I mean, not everything will progress at the same pace. All I was really saying was 2022 is our next political cycle. We are planning way beyond that, because we think the effects of this shutdown and this virus will continue to have some effect on the economy and the city for quite considerable time to come, and that's confirmed by any of the science you listen to. And I know our university colleagues, for instance, are planning on a 4 and 5 year plan to recover and get back to the normal level of business. So I think we've got to accept that there is a longer term effect on this for some parts of this city. And I don't mean geographic parts of the city, but sectors. But what we've got to do is we've got to follow the public health advice, so that where we can loosen up quickly, and we've done some scenario planning that we can loosen up that quickly to allow people to get up and running quicker, then we will do so. But the reality is we're having to follow sound public health advice. What we don't want to do is open up too early and then find ourselves having to close businesses and shut them back down again, because that's what's required in terms of health. That'd be more damaging, I suspect, to businesses than just waiting for a while longer to open up. Although in some cases that probably isn't factual, is it? And there's no doubt there's going to be some damage. We have to try and mitigate that damage and make it as little as possible. And on the positive side, if you look at the financial crisis in 2007-8, Edinburgh recovered from the financial crisis much quicker than any other part of Scotland. And I think that's exactly what will happen here. We will recover quicker than any other part of Scotland and lots of other parts of the UK in recovering from this crisis. And we've just got to keep some confidence that that's the case. We've got the right people, we've got an educated population, we've got business entrepreneurship. We think we've got the will to make this better. So hopefully that'll be the case, and we will recover quicker than others. But nobody should think this is it'll be finished by September or October, because it won't be. I confidently predict.
Okay, well, I see it's 4 o'clock, Andrew, so I know you've got to get on to your next meeting. So
Yeah.
I'll just kind of...
Mc Areavey waits me.
Yes. So we've covered a lot of ground there. Thank you very much. And I suppose the few good things that have come out of this, I noted down, was that we've no homelessness in Edinburgh at the moment. So that's a very, very positive thing. And I suppose the other thing is, you talked about we can make our future economy what we want it to be, rather than necessarily go back to the inequalities of the old ways. So looking at fair work and equality and net zero carbon, these are all things that businesses need to build in to their new normal and their new business model. So I think this is a real, as you say, a real opportunity for us to rethink how we embed those things into sort of everyday life. But I suppose I did want to come back to your point as well, that it's really important that we work together as a city. So it's not just City Council pulling your recovery plan together, it's how we as a business community contribute to that. And as you rightly said, how do we lobby government to support Edinburgh as well? Because this isn't going to come without a cost. And if we are going to minimise the permanent business closures and minimise the redundancies and job losses, that means that businesses need to keep going. They need to keep employing people, and we are the economy of the city, so a lot rests with us being supported and supporting each other. So it's not going to happen on its own. So I guess we need to work with you very closely to understand what you're doing, how we can feed in our own experiences and how we're being impacted, and how we can potentially get more support from Scottish or UK government to see us through this. So the offer is there. Please engage with us and make sure that we are able to feed in to a lot of your planning over the coming months. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. If you do want to feed in how you're being impacted or how you can contribute, please let us know via the chamber. I have a catch-up call with Andrew, and we're engaged in a lot of the sectoral initiatives, like the tourism strategy and the way ETAG's leading on that. So very happy to engage with businesses and feed in whatever ideas you have. Okay, that's us 3 minutes over time. I'll let you go, Andrew. But thanks very much, everybody, for joining us, and see you all again soon. Stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.